I always believed a mother's love could survive anything: distance, mistakes, even betrayal. But the day my son looked me in the eye and demanded I pay off his wife's $300,000 debt, something inside me cracked. Not because of the money, but because of what his eyes told me. I wasn't his mother anymore. I was just a wallet with a heartbeat. That night, while the city slept, I packed a single suitcase, left a note on the kitchen counter, and vanished from their lives without a trace. My name is Margaret Hale, and for most of my life, I thought I'd done everything right. I raised my son, David, on my own after his father passed away when he was just 7. I worked 2 jobs, skipped vacations, and learned to live with an empty chair at the dinner table. Every sacrifice I made was for him, to give him the kind of life I could only dream of. When David grew up, he became everything I'd hoped for: smart, confident, the kind of man people naturally trusted. He got into business school, landed a good job, and eventually met Linda, a bright, talkative woman who seemed to light up any room she walked into. I'll admit, she wasn't what I'd pictured for him. Too polished, too sure of herself, but if she made him happy, that was enough for me. Their wedding was small but beautiful. I remember standing there watching them promise forever and feeling this deep, quiet pride. My boy had made it. He'd built a life. And maybe finally I could rest. For the first few years, things seemed fine. We'd have dinner every other Sunday, talk about their work, their plans, their dreams. Then one day, the phone rang. It was David, and there was something in his voice I hadn't heard before: hesitation. "Mom," he said, "can we come by? There's something we need to talk about." When they arrived, Linda did most of the talking. She told me she'd made a few financial missteps. I didn't understand what that meant at first, until David slid a folder across the table. Inside were credit statements, loans, and overdue balances. $300,000 worth of debt. I sat there frozen, trying to make sense of it all. "How?" I asked quietly. Linda sighed, as if it were a minor inconvenience. "It's just a few investments that didn't go as planned. But we'll fix it. We just need some help." I looked at my son. "You're asking me to pay this off?" David didn't flinch. "You've got savings, Mom. You could do this. You'd still have enough to live comfortably." I laughed, but it came out wrong, too sharp, too bitter. "That money is my retirement, David. It's all I have." He leaned forward, his tone suddenly colder. "Mom, she's my wife. If you love me, you'll help us." That sentence didn't sound like him. It sounded like someone else speaking through him. I couldn't find the words. I'd spent my whole life giving him everything: my time, my strength, my peace, and now he was asking for what little I had left. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, the city lights flickering against the glass, and thought about every sacrifice I'd made to raise him. Every scraped knee, every late bill, every lonely night. Somewhere along the way, I'd taught him that love meant giving without question, and now that lesson was destroying me. In the morning, I tried to talk to him again. I told him I couldn't do it. I told him he needed to take responsibility, that marriage meant facing things together, but he only looked at me with that same cold distance. "Then I guess I misjudged you," he said, standing up. "You're not the person I thought you were." He left, and I watched the door close behind him. The sound of it echoed through the house like a final goodbye. For days, I went through the motions, making coffee, watering the plants, pretending everything was fine. But something inside me had broken. I realized that I wasn't living anymore. I was waiting. Waiting for another call, another demand, another disappointment. So I stopped waiting. One quiet evening, I packed a small suitcase, emptied my phone, and left a note on the counter. "I love you, but I can't do this anymore." Then I walked out the door and disappeared. But what I didn't know then was that leaving wasn't the hardest part. It was what came after: the silence, the guilt, and the truth I would discover miles away from the life I thought I knew. Because sometimes disappearing isn't running away, it's the only way to survive the people you love most. The first night away felt unreal. I checked into a small roadside motel 3 hours out of town, the kind with humming neon lights and faded curtains that smelled like old rain. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my reflection in the dark TV screen. I didn't look like someone who'd just escaped. I looked like someone who'd lost everything. For the first time in decades, no one knew where I was. No one expected a call, a visit, a favor. The silence was heavy at first, almost frightening. But beneath that silence was something else: peace. I spent the next few days driving aimlessly. Small towns, long highways, nameless diners. I'd stop for coffee and listen to the quiet hum of other people's lives. It was strange, but comforting. I wasn't David's mother anymore. I was just Margaret. Eventually, I found a small coastal town called Willow Bay. The ocean stretched endlessly, and the air smelled like salt and pine. I rented a little cottage on the edge of town, a place so small I could hear the waves through the bedroom window at night. The first morning, I stood on the porch watching the sunrise. The world felt still, and for a fleeting moment, I believed maybe I could start over. I found work at a local bakery. Nothing fancy, just helping with morning prep and washing dishes. The owner, Carol, was a woman in her 60s, with kind eyes and a voice that carried warmth. She never asked too many questions, and I never volunteered answers. Every evening after work, I'd walk along the beach with a cup of coffee and just breathe. The rhythm of the waves became my therapy. The loneliness didn't disappear, but it started to make sense. Then, about 2 weeks later, I heard the sound of a familiar ringtone in my bag. I'd forgotten I still had the old phone, the one I hadn't powered on since the night I left. Against my better judgment, I turned it on. The screen filled with missed calls and messages. Most were from David. The last one was 3 days old. "Mom, where are you? Please call me. We're worried." I stared at the message for a long time. The word "we" cut deep. Even now, she was still a part of him. His voice blended with hers, his choices tangled in hers. I didn't respond. I deleted the messages and powered the phone off again. But that night, sleep wouldn't come. Every creak in the cottage sounded like his voice. Every gust of wind whispered my name. I told myself I'd made the right decision, that I had every right to protect what little life I had left. But a mother's heart doesn't move on easily. Guilt sat beside me at every meal, followed me into every dream. One morning at the bakery, Carol handed me an envelope. "This came for you," she said. There was no return address, but I knew the handwriting instantly. Inside was a letter from David. The first line made my hands tremble. "Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for things to go that way." He went on about how things had spiraled, how Linda was still angry I hadn't helped, how they were trying to fix it on their own. But the part that broke me was the last paragraph. "I know you think I don't understand what you've done for me, but I do. I just wish you'd come home so I could prove it." Tears blurred the words until I couldn't read anymore. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope, then tucked it in the drawer beside my bed. I didn't write back. I couldn't. I wasn't ready to face him, not yet. Days turned into weeks, and the ache dulled. I built routines. Mornings at the bakery, walks on the beach, quiet evenings watching the sunset paint the water gold. Life wasn't perfect, but it was peaceful. Until one afternoon, Carol came running from the front of the bakery. "Margaret," she said, breathless, "someone's here asking for you." My heart sank. When I stepped out front, I froze. It wasn't David, it was Linda. Her hair was neatly tied back, her face calm, but her eyes, those sharp, calculating eyes, were locked on me with something that looked a lot like triumph. "I knew I'd find you," she said softly. "We need to talk." The walls of my little world started to close in again. My hands trembled as I reached for the counter to steady myself. Because whatever she'd come for, I already knew it wasn't forgiveness. And this time, disappearing might not be enough to save me. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Seeing her there in that tiny bakery filled with the smell of sugar and coffee felt unreal, like a nightmare slipping into daylight. I hadn't said her name in months, hadn't even allowed myself to imagine her face. And now, here she was, standing 3 feet away, smiling like we were old friends instead of enemies. I forced myself to stay calm. "How did you find me?" She tilted her head, that same polished confidence dripping from her voice. "You're not that hard to track down, Margaret. You used your real name to rent this place." She was right, of course. I'd never been good at hiding, not really. "I don't know what you think you're doing here," I said quietly, but whatever it is, you need to leave." She gave a soft laugh. "Oh, I'm not here to fight. I came to talk, for David." Just hearing his name out of her mouth made something inside me twist. "David doesn't need you speaking for him," I said. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "You're wrong. He's not doing well. You walking out like that, it destroyed him. He lost his job. We're drowning, Margaret. He's not sleeping. He's not eating." I wanted to believe her, but every word that left her lips felt rehearsed, measured. "And you came here because," she sighed dramatically, "because we need your help." Again. There it was, the real reason. I turned away, staring out the bakery window toward the gray line of the ocean in the distance. I could feel Carol watching from behind the counter, uncertain, but wise enough not to interrupt. I don't have anything for you, I said, my voice trembling more than I wanted it to. I gave everything I could. There's nothing left. Linda's smile faded. Don't lie to me. You have a house, a pension, savings. You're just being selfish. Selfish. The word hit me like a slap. All those years of struggle, all the quiet nights I'd stayed awake worrying about David's future. And now I was selfish? I clenched my hands. You've taken enough, Linda. You both have. Her expression shifted, cold and hard. You think running away fixes things? It doesn't. You left your son broken. You owe him more than this. Something inside me snapped. No, I don't owe either of you a thing. The words came out stronger than I expected. For the first time, I didn't sound like the woman who'd spent her life apologizing for loving too much. Linda's face tightened. She reached into her bag and pulled out a piece of paper. A printed document. She placed it on the counter. If you won't do it for love, maybe you'll do it for this. I glanced down. It was a bank statement. My name was listed as a co-signer on a loan I'd never taken. My stomach dropped. What is this? She smiled faintly. A little insurance. David didn't want to do it, but he had no choice. If the payments stop, your name's on the hook too. My chest tightened. I hadn't signed anything, but then I remembered. Months before I left, David had asked me to sign a few investment documents for him. I never read them. I just trusted him. My son. Linda saw the realization in my eyes and stepped closer. You can run, Margaret, but not from this. You'll pay one way or another. My voice was barely a whisper. You forged my name. She shrugged. Prove it. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The bakery felt too small, the air too thin. Finally, I picked up the document, tore it in half, and threw it into the trash. Get out, I said quietly. If you ever show up here again, I'll call the police. She smirked. You think they'll believe you over us? You're just an old woman hiding in a beach town. And then she was gone. I stood there, shaking, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Carol came over and gently placed a hand on my shoulder. You all right? I nodded, but I wasn't. Inside, panic was clawing its way through me. My mind kept replaying her words. You'll pay one way or another. That night, I didn't go home. I walked along the shore until the sky turned black, until my legs ached and the wind burned my face. The ocean roared like it was trying to drown out my thoughts, but I could still hear her voice clear as ever. I thought leaving had freed me, but now I realized I hadn't escaped at all. Because sometimes the past doesn't chase you, it waits, patiently, until you have nowhere left to run. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window of my tiny cottage, staring at the ocean, my mind spinning. Every wave that crashed against the shore sounded like an accusation. I thought disappearing would give me peace, but now it felt like I'd only built myself a fragile illusion, one that could shatter with a single signature I never meant to write. By morning, I made up my mind. I wasn't going to run anymore, not this time. I went to the local library and asked to use a computer. My hands shook as I typed David's name into a search bar. Within seconds, articles popped up. Local business blogs, court notices, small-town papers. He'd lost his job 6 months ago. The company had gone under after a series of failed ventures. There were rumors about loans and personal guarantees. I didn't need to read between the lines to see the truth. They were desperate. I felt a lump in my throat as I stared at his photo. My son, smiling in a company headshot, looking so much like his father it hurt. How had we gotten here? How had the boy who once built birdhouses in our backyard turned into someone who'd sign his mother's name to a lie? I closed the laptop and pressed my palms to my eyes, trying to stop the tears. Guilt and anger warred inside me, each one taking turns to burn. When I left the library, Carol was waiting outside. She had 2 cups of coffee in her hands and that look she got when she already knew something was wrong. You want to talk about it? She asked gently. I hesitated. Then, for the first time since I'd arrived, I told someone everything. The debt, the fight, the forged documents, even the way Linda's smile still haunted me. Carol listened without interrupting once. When I finished, she took a slow sip of her coffee and said, You know, honey, sometimes the only way to make peace is to stop carrying guilt that doesn't belong to you. Her words hit me harder than I expected. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a notebook. For hours, I wrote. Every memory, every truth, every mistake. I wrote as if I were speaking to David, telling him all the things I couldn't say out loud. When I finished, my hand ached, but my heart felt a little lighter. A few days passed. I started to feel almost normal again. The ocean had its rhythm back. The bakery was busy, and laughter filled the air like sugar dust. But peace never lasts long when the past still has your address. Late one afternoon, there was a knock on my door. I opened it to find a man in a dark suit holding an envelope. "Mrs. Hale?" he asked. I nodded slowly. He handed me the envelope. "You've been served." My hands went cold. Inside were legal papers, a notice of financial responsibility. The loan Linda had mentioned was real. My name was on every page. If I didn't contest it, they could seize my assets. For a long moment, I just stared at the papers, the words blurring together. I called the only lawyer in town the next morning, a man named Greg Patterson, who'd been practicing longer than I'd been alive. He read through the documents, his brow furrowed. "You didn't sign this," he said. "I can tell from the scan. It's a copy, and the signature's off, but they're counting on you not fighting back. Can we prove it?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "If you're willing to go through with it, yes, but it won't be easy." I nodded. "Then let's do it." The next few weeks were a blur of calls, affidavits, and sleepless nights. For the first time in years, I wasn't running. I was fighting. Not just for my savings, but for my dignity. For every mother who'd ever been taken for granted by the child she'd given everything to. Then, one morning, I got an email from Greg. Attached was a scanned statement, part of the evidence Linda had submitted. But there, at the bottom, was something I hadn't expected. A note in her handwriting. "Make sure Margaret never sees this." My blood ran cold. For a long time, I just sat there staring at the words. It wasn't just manipulation anymore, it was betrayal, deliberate and cruel. I realized then that Linda hadn't come to the bakery because she was desperate. She'd come because she was afraid. She knew what would happen if I found out. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and made a decision. I wasn't going to hide anymore. It was time to go back. To face my son. To tell him the truth about his wife, his debt, and the mother he'd almost destroyed. Because some battles you don't fight to win, you fight to remind yourself that you're still standing. And I wasn't done standing yet. When I got off the bus back in the city, the air felt different. Heavier somehow, like it remembered me. The streets were familiar but foreign. Every corner holding a memory I wasn't sure I wanted to face. I hadn't seen David in almost a year, but I knew where to find him. He still lived in that big house on Elmwood Drive, the one he bought back when everything still looked perfect from the outside. The curtains were drawn tight, the lawn unkempt, and the mailbox was stuffed full of unopened letters. It didn't look like a home anymore. It looked like a confession. I stood on the porch for a long time before I knocked. My heart was racing. The door opened slowly. David stood there, thinner than I remembered, with dark circles under his eyes. For a second, he didn't recognize me. Then his face fell. "Mom?" His voice cracked. I nodded. "Can we talk?" He stepped aside wordlessly and I walked in. The living room was a mess. Papers everywhere, empty bottles, unpaid bills stacked like towers. The house smelled of neglect and old guilt. We sat across from each other, silence stretching between us. Finally, he spoke. "Linda told me you'd never come back." I took a slow breath. Linda told a lot of lies. He looked up at me then, really looked. There was shame in his eyes, but also something softer. Fear, maybe. "I didn't know she forged it, Mom." I swear, I didn't know until after. "I saw her note," I said quietly. "She planned it. She wanted to trap me, and you—" I hesitated, the words catching in my throat. "You let her." He buried his face in his hands. "I thought I could fix it before you found out. I thought if I could just get the money, by ruining me." My voice broke before I could stop it. "David, I would have helped you. You know that. You could have told me the truth." He didn't answer. The only sound was the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Finally, I stood. "I didn't come here for an apology," and I said, "I came here because I needed you to see what this did to me, to both of us. You can lose money, you can lose a house, but when you lose trust, there's no buying it back." He lifted his head, tears streaking his face. "What do I do now?" I looked around the room, the broken picture frames, the silence heavy with everything unsaid. "You start by cleaning up your mess. Not just this house, your life. And when you're ready to face the consequences, I'll be there. But not until then." I turned toward the door. For a moment, I thought he might stop me, but he didn't. He just sat there, small and lost in the wreckage he'd built himself. As I walked down the steps, the cold air hit me like a wave, sharp and clean. For the first time in years, I felt something close to peace. I took one last look at the house. The curtains fluttered slightly like a sigh. Maybe one day he'd come find me, maybe he wouldn't. But I wasn't waiting anymore. I'd spent too many years being the rescuer, the fixer, the mother who carried everyone else's mistakes like they were her own. Not anymore. I got on the bus heading back to the coast, to the little bakery, to the quiet life I'd rebuilt from ashes. As the city faded behind me, I realized something. I hadn't disappeared to run away. I disappeared to start over. Because sometimes the bravest thing a mother can do isn't to save her child, it's to save herself. And that's exactly what I did. When the bus turned toward the horizon, the sun broke through the clouds, flooding the road with light. It felt like forgiveness, warm, steady, and real. But deep down, I knew this story wasn't finished. Not really. Because the past has a funny way of finding you when you least expect it. And sometimes it doesn't come knocking. Sometimes it walks right through the door.